Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. Hello, my friends, and welcome to Psychology to Live By. Well, today's a roundtable with some very creative and mentally well people. I'm joined by my friends from Network Music, Terry McBride, Chairman and CEO, Colleen Novak, Artist Manager, Chris Norwood, Chief Strategy Officer, and Karen Mix, Director, People and Operations. The podcast we will discuss is Music, Creativity and Mental Health with Drew Southwell, better known as Portair, an indie multi-instrumentalist, songwriter and producer. Our experienced and insightful participants have watched the podcasts of that name, which you can see or listen to at my website, drchris.life, or wherever you get your podcasts. But I'll do a quick summary now before we go into our Q&A. Well, Drew is originally from Sydney, Australia, but is now based in Germany and the US. And his music examines existential questions, utilising very rich soundscapes and arresting melodies. We had a free-flowing and candid conversation about music, mental health and creativity, in which we touched on many topics, including Drew's background as an artist, his drivenness to create and the factors that nurture his creativity, the centrality of uncertainty and the tolerance of ambiguity in the creative process, and how the true meaning of what one creates often emerges much later. The foundation of symbol, metaphor and analogy in the creative process, and especially learning to productively coexist with one's self-doubt. We talked about the primacy of just doing or just starting, and also the joys and benefits of collaboration. Drew discussed his own mental health experiences and how therapy very positively changed his life. And finally, the important distinction between a healthy and unhealthy perfectionism. It was a delightful conversation. And so now to my existentially grounded friends from Network Music. Well, hello, my friends. Do you feel existentially grounded?
Always.
At least one of you. Let's jump into it. I really enjoyed this conversation with Drew. I found him, as I said, to be a very just honest, open, thoughtful person. But I won't lead the witnesses. I'm very interested in your reactions, thoughts, insights, feelings about the podcast. Who would like to kick off?
I can go. Happy to. Um, well, like you said, Dr. Chris, you covered a lot of ground in this one. And I found it was really nice because there were so many common themes of conversations that we've had in the past, like neuroplasticity came up a couple times, which is like, I continue to be fascinated by that. The mining, the struggle in creativity opposed to like creating in the struggle. Um, and intrinsic motivation, all of those things. They were just really, really great things to revisit. I think what stuck with me in this one was the self-concern versus egolessness. And so like taking these calls, for instance, for myself, like I the self-concern in the preparation for having these conversations, like I don't want to sound stupid. What am I gonna say? I'm comparing myself to these brainiacs on like what are they gonna say? So it was a nice I don't call it reminder, call it whatever it is, that like if you can approach things from a state of the egolessness, that like how much more of an authentic experience you can create for yourself. I guess just like the effect on the experience that you have in that authenticity. So that was just not a question, but just like that was a really great
Oh
takeaway.
no, but it's such a wonderful, I think, way to start our discussion because that kind of self-doubt is was probably defining of the species. It's not like you're alone in that. I mean, there are some personality differences there. There are some people who think too highly of themselves and don't have enough self-doubt. But for most folks, this is entirely normal. And I think what Drew said somewhere in our conversation was learning to coexist with it, right? And so it's not like it's going to go away sometime soon, but it's not taking it quite so seriously. It's sort of like acknowledging it and then returning our attention not to how self is going, but to the task at hand or to other people or to the world. Yeah. So the suffering of it is entirely that when we get lost in it, when we identify with it, and it dissolves, it disappears when we get engaged, right? And yeah, and there was a real sense, especially towards the end, like he'd mentioned it on the way through, and then he talked about his mental health challenges, and what really came out was a kind of perfectionism. He said he worked obsessively and he was burning out, but he hadn't really examined what sat underneath it. And of course, what sat underneath it is exactly what you're talking about, and that was a revelation for him. And as you said, it's a lifelong process. It's not like you do it once and you're done. But also, I just wanted to acknowledge you, Karen, just beautifully humble but honest. For me, that's courageous.
Well, thank
Right. Yeah, yeah. No, it is. And I think people listening, they just would have all been moved by the way you expressed it because it touches on everyone, right? And look, I know there's three other people on this call who aren't stupid,
you. Far from.
but I'm sure if we did some sort of audit on all of these roundtables and we looked at your contributions, compared to theirs, there's no qualitative difference there.
Agreed.
So that concern, and this is true of most people, it's not necessarily very objective,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
right? And we achieve despite that,
Mhm.
and we can kind of acknowledge it and then decide not to be distracted by it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's almost like it's an occupational thing, right? Like yeah, an intentional, like, yeah, don't be distracted by that self-concern or what have you. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, just to say one other thing. This, especially as a young therapist, like that was just so present in my mind. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. They should go see a real therapist, someone who's got some skills and knowledge. And one of the, but you have to drop that. Like, your job is not there thinking about yourself. It's to actually be entirely present, right? And turns out that doing that day after day after day after day, week after week, month and years, it becomes a bit of a habit to acknowledge, I'm thinking about self rather than paying attention over here. And that was very good for me, right? So it's still there, but it doesn't occupy my attention as anywhere near as much as it used to. Yeah. Who is going to follow up that brilliant opening by Karen?
I'll try my best.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, there's a number of things besides an Aussie accent getting you out of a speeding ticket, which I found funny. Just like people think that people with English accents sing better songs, right?
Yeah.
Um, what I found and which really resonated with me, which I've witnessed, many times in my, career is the metaphorically thinking and the invention versus the significant and the perception of the creator versus the perception of the listener. And especially if a critic hears a song and they say that this is what it's about, and the artist was like, I wasn't even thinking that, but hell, they're right.
Yeah.
And that I found really, really interesting because usually I found that artists write it from one perspective, but they're not necessarily thinking of all the threads through it. And then someone
Yeah.
else comes and pulls those threads and actually knits something with it.
Yeah, that's
I,
so.
that's
It,
and that's across every creative
yeah,
realm. I mean, I'm quite sure that Mozart did not think that certain songs would be seen through a certain lens, and same with Monet or whoever, right?
correct. It's so fascinating, isn't it, Terry? I mean, there's a couple of thoughts. Often, I think the case is that the song, or for example, you're going to know this, but it's true for all creators. The creative product that the artist likes is not necessarily the one that really goes bang, and really touches
Yeah.
thousands or millions of people, right?
We always say the song you like the least will like be your most popular song. So please be comfortable with playing that for the next 20 years.
Yeah. So, and I think a way of understanding what's going on here is, and so there's a sense in which the creator doesn't have sole ownership of the creative work, right?
Yeah.
And this sort of theme in there that we talked about, the artist being a sort of conduit through which the creativity comes. I think we can make that a little bit more sort of practical in to say that obviously everything that we do comes through our entire existence, our experience, the sociology, the family, the education, all the experiences that we have write us.
Yeah.
And so we often don't know the full significance of what we say, and when we talked about the hierarchical structure of consciousness, this is, I think, where it really is significant, because you can listen to a song and it really moves you, but you don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you'll listen to it many, many times over the years, and 5 years' time, you really see something that's definitely in there that you didn't recognize before. So there are levels of significance, some of which are not available to the conscious mind, at least yet.
Yeah.
And I think that's what. And so symbol and metaphor and analogy and so on, they give us access to that vast network of meaning and significance. And we do it intuitively because we can't grasp all that in our poor frontal lobes, like we just can't be conscious of all that. So that feeling aspect is really, really important. But then also, as you say, you can't be precious about it either, because in many ways it's the listener or the observer who creates the artwork.
Mm-hmm.
if it lives and resonates with them.
Yeah.
It really is fascinating.
They essentially attach their own emotions to the emotion of the artist, making it their own. So you can have a million people like the same song, and they each have a slight emotion to it.
Yeah, and
Fascinating.
just to map it onto the therapeutic situation just for a sec, I'd say this has happened several hundred times. I might bump into someone who I did therapy with ages ago, and they said, that thing you said to me, that made such a difference, right? And they tell me what it was. It's just, I have no memory of it. It seemed like a trivial offhand remark rather than a profound, so there's that as well. It's fantastic. So, Colleen, Chris, who's going to
I can
jump
go.
in next?
I would echo everything you said about Karen, just putting that one in there.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
we're doing our best in this round table to really embarrass her,
Yeah, where we
make her
talk about
squirm.
egolessness, I'm developing an ego during this call.
no, the main thing that I thought about was just how difficult self-doubt and how crippling it can be. And just especially for a creative, there are just so many examples of artists who can't get to where they should and deserve to and have the talent to because of their lack of confidence or self-doubt or so many things. And
Yeah.
he's really come a long way, and it was great to hear him talk about the friend that he had as well that had gone through, similar, different but similar experiences that he could connect with. But I think I don't know. I think maybe it's individual, but does everybody has their own path and everybody has a way of figuring that out, and maybe it's just time, maybe it's personality, maybe it's just reminding yourself of what you're capable of, and that those positive affirmations, or
All right.
doing working on it.
This is a doozy. Um, so let's just tease apart a few things here. So, leaving aside pathologies of extreme narcissism, etc., and sociopathic types, a small percentage of the population. I think if you scratch anyone in the right place, you'll find insecurity, right? And there's a lot of theorizing and research that points to this from different theoretical frames, whether it's as social psychology or evolutionary psychology. But the idea is that, two things, I think. One, that we are an incredibly social species. So we're mammals to start with, which they're social animals. And we are probably the most social of all the animals in the sense. So part of what that means is that we depend on other people's opinion of us. It needs to be, positive and high enough esteem and status that we'll get the job, or we'll be worth remunerating, or we're a valuable person. And if you go back to the Stone Age and you're in a small village and you're a net negative on the village, that's a danger for the village, given that survival was so marginal. So social rejection comes with this heavy freight of it's existential, of not surviving unless the village connects with, wants me as a constructive part of that, right? So that's I think half of the story, and it's because of the way I framed it there, you can kind of see it's pretty much universal, that we need other people, and we need other people to think well of us, and so we're all. One way of looking at that is that we're navigating these kind of status games the whole of our existence. All right. Now I don't think that's the whole story, but I'll come back to it. A second major dimension that I think is unique to human beings is this desire to matter. As one philosopher calls it, mattering. And, and how we matter is very different for different people. For some, mattering is not about what other people think at all. It's a spiritual quest, or it might be they're completely absorbed in perfecting some pursuit and they don't care what other people think about it, right? But for others, mattering is completely mapped onto what other people think. And, so there are these different ways of mattering. But what strikes me is that there's no human being I've ever met who doesn't want to matter. And so I think often these two things are somewhat conflated and confused, right? But we all have to navigate it. I mean, why am I doing this bloody podcast, and doing the social media, right? And I think it is a mix of some of these mattering motives. And why do you guys do what you do? And I think there's a lot of meaning and significance tied into doing stuff that you think makes a difference, for example, right? So, Colleen, why do some people make more ground with it than other people, I think, is the essence of what you're saying. And well, that's a bloody mystery in many ways, because it is like it's one of the great frustrations as a psychologist to be looking at a person saying you're fine. If only you would realise it. You have value if only you would just recognise it. But there's this thing is so consuming and so blinding, that they can't see it, and it's frustrating. Say no, just drop that self-concern. You're fine, But as we know, it takes a lot to get to that point of view, and many people never do. And so then there's the question about, well, why do some people do it and others not? Sometimes, and I think this is probably fairly pathetic in my part and is not a good explanation, but I think courage is important. To have, like when Drew was talking about it, there's a certain point where the suffering is enough, but even so, you still need a bit of courage to be vulnerable. And then shock, horror, surprise, he finds out other people have very similar experience to him. And that's the other mystery of this. When people are stuck in this, they just think they're the only person in the world who's like this. And the joke is, no, just about everyone on the planet is like this. And once you realise that you start to, okay. Now there's one other piece. This could be a whole podcast thing, and that is, I think there's something beyond just overcoming, getting better at gathering esteem or getting better at mattering, and that is what Karen was alluding to, and that's the egolessness. At some point going, you know what, all of that worry about mattering and all that concern about being connected and a valued person in the tribe, that's all good, but it's not fundamental because, there is just the question of being present and being, and frequently that's enough, more than enough. All right, so that's a long, winding road to your observations, Colleen.
No,
Which, that's my pleasure, which of course leaves us with His Majesty. What's in your mind, Chris?
I don't know how I follow any of this. This is very, there's a lot of, I've gotten as many sort of mental jumping off points out of this conversation almost as I did out of the podcast itself. I'm very appreciative of everybody's comments here. This has been great. The one other thing that really also my mind just sort of latched onto in that conversation was that using the creative process and evolution as an analog for each other. And that really kind of resonated with me in a roundabout way, and with the idea being that like the evolutionary process is these like constant, minute little changes, some of which lead nowhere, some of which lead somewhere, with the idea being that, replicating that creatively is just like not being precious about it,
Yeah.
continuing to just try and do and not get hung up in all of the baggage that we've been talking about that can cloud us and hold us back from actually just doing it. And taking that almost one step further, and I might be kind of overdoing the analogy a bit here, but is the idea that like sometimes in an evolutionary process, there might be some, genetic mutation or change that is really positive that
Yes.
doesn't go anywhere. For one reason or another, that gene doesn't get passed on the right way and it vanishes. And that's okay also, right? Like over time, the right things kind of imbue and and the path follows to allow that species or whatever it is that we're using this analogy to continue to grow and develop.
Yeah.
And, so for bringing that back to a creative discussion is this idea of like, yeah, it's okay to just do a bunch that's garbage and you don't care about, and you don't have to care about it. It can exist as not being quote unquote good. And it's also okay for something that is quote unquote good to not necessarily have to land the way that you might then want it to
Yeah.
land. It can just also be good. It just can just exist on its own as a piece of art or a piece of creation or whatever, and you can continue to go on and do other things as a result or instead or whatever. So it really was this like removing of attachment of value to the output as an immediate need for the reason to do the output. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, it does. And there's plenty of empirical evidence to support that. That I think I've said several times that the single best predictor of excellent creative output is the quantity of output. And also, of course, there's not, as in my discussion with Terry earlier, there's no correlation between what might be really creative for me and what audience exists for, what environment is out there that's it's either going to fit into or not. And history is just full of creatives of all kinds being ahead of their time, and their creations not falling on fertile soil, as it were, because the world wasn't ready for it, right? So that's fine. But there's another dimension to this, there is another dimension to this, and that is not having the ego attached to the quality all the time, but perhaps having a more intrinsically motivated absorption, and in the process for the sake of the process. So I was really impressed. Drew said something like, he writes a lot. He writes all the time, and that for me is the real clue there. It's like this is an identity. It's not just an occupation. This is who he is. He's amongst other things, he's a writer, and that's how he expresses himself. And then once you've established that about oneself, there's not this expectation that everything I write is going to be good. Because and I remember talking to writers for my PhD, and all of them said something I thought that was really fascinating, and that is that the most creative part of writing is editing. In other words, it's both selecting and then changing and polishing. So that the first round of stuff is just they then go and mine it for anything that looks like it's got possibility. So part of that is this creative insight into what in amongst all of that rubble, is something of value, and that's only their creative mind, their consciousness will be able to identify that diamond in the rough, to use that metaphor, right? So, but if you don't produce enough rough, you don't produce diamonds. Yeah. Yeah, so he's really figured that out, I think, from experience. And it to be fair, it might be one beneficial byproduct of that period in his life where he burnt himself out and was obsessively working, in the sense that he'd produced a lot of stuff because of that obsessiveness. And by the way, that's a trap for perfectionists, because they have the intuition that their success is partly fed by their perfectionism, right? And so they're a bit loath to let it go. But as we talked about in the podcast, you don't have to let go of all perfectionism, but the perfectionism that's about this social concern about whether it's good enough, that's the one we can let go. And we can replace it with this absorption and curiosity in the doing. And then that doesn't wear you out, and it produces as much and is much better for you psychologically and probably practically. Alrighty, well, it's such fun talking to you guys, and like you said, Chris, we get a lot of insights, I think, from our conversation. That's why it's a roundtable. It's not, of course, it's principally about whatever podcast we're talking about, but we get a lot, I think, and I think we provide a lot to people by having a conversation of this kind, which is not as prevalent and as common as one would like in modern life. So that's by way of me saying thank you to you guys.
Thank you for facilitating, setting it up.
My pleasure. Well, you're all busy. You've got things to do that are much more valuable. So I'll
Not so
see
sure
you.
about that, but thank you.
I'll see you next time, guys.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you like the podcast and want to know more, my website is www.drchris.life. There you'll find links to my various social media posts, a newsletter, and lots more. And share the podcast with people you like so they can like it too.